Okay, yeah, I was sleeping and I thought, don't know what I was dreaming about anyway. Had all these thoughts going from my mind. When was evolution actually a fact? The scientific world has, apparently 99% of all scientists believe, but we know that there's literally hundreds and hundreds that have signed petitions saying they don't believe evolution, all PhD scientists. But and a lot of colleagues have talked to them saying they also don't believe evolution, but they're too afraid to speak out because of the pressure that universities put on them. They can lose their jobs, they can all sorts of stuff, and there's been a lot of instances of that happening. So not just because 99% of scientists don't believe it doesn't mean really anything. There's only less than 10% of people believe the Bible in the world. So that's like 90% of people who don't. Okay, so if you translate that into science world, well, that 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 doesn't actually mean anything because evolution itself, by the Supreme Court ruling, has been ruled as a religion. So evolution is a religion. Um, if I not, it doesn't surprise me at all that 99% of scientists who are evolutionists don't believe, you know, the Bible or creation or a designer. Now, evolution, remember, was put forward as a way, as a um, as a way of trying to prove that God doesn't exist. That was what it was put forward for, and that's why it was so embraced by science. It is it's just a way that people who don't want to believe in God can actually have a mental avenue to justify themselves. Now it says God is. The Bible says really clear that God has put in their heart. Everyone knows God exists, and no man is without an excuse. But the Bible says, but men harden their hearts and refuse to acknowledge Him. And this is what's been happening with evolution. People don't want to believe in God, don't want to acknowledge He exists, harden their hearts, and they try to reinforce that hardness with mental reasoning. And evolution is one of their little things they hide behind. Now they don't want to lose that because that is actually um, their belief. Okay, it's regardless of evidence. It's just a position they hide behind. Yeah. So when was it ever a fact? If you think about it, Darwin proposed this theory. Oh, it became a theory because theories are supposed to be something that cannot be scientifically tested. Okay, but anyway, but a theory in the general sense from in science, a theory means it's acceptable fact. Okay, that's what they look at it as. It's even though it can't be tested, it is all the evidence points to it as being a fact. So if a scientist says the theory of evolution, they're meaning the fact of evolution. That's what they see. Whereas if a normal person says, "Oh, it's just a theory," they're meaning it in the word, meaning it like it's a hypothesis, um, meaning it's just an idea. But science doesn't use that; they use theory. So when was it ever? Why should it be a theory? Why not just a hypothesis? Why? When was it ever accepted by science, and why? Why is it a fact, or why have it continued to be considered a fact? Overwhelming evidence for it? Well, the original evidence for it that Darwin proposed has every single one of his ideas has actually been debunked and taken down. Now, if the scientists, when Darwin brought this up at the time, when he raised this idea and concept to the scientific world, But the scientists at the time had debunked it straight in front of them, and and they'd got dealt with it 200 years ago. It would have gone. Every single one of his ideas he proposed, bang, it's been taken down. He did the peppered moths. He did the finches. You see, the finches' beaks, they grow in their lifetimes. They can change by diet and climate. Their beaks actually grow and contract, and they oscillate between. So they some years they can grow their beaks with the diet they're eating, and other years their beaks shrink. Just like cats in winter, their fur on their body they'll get more and more on it because of winter, and then they start shedding it during summer. Not evolution. In fact, it's an incredibly good argument that you could say well designed. Okay, I would say more in favor of a designer who put in a lot of amazing information into the DNA to allow them to do that. Okay, so the finches debunked. Peppered moths, the person who took the photo of the peppered moths on the tree and all that, he glued them on the tree, and observable evidence is that the moths don't even live on the trees. That's not their habitat. So that was sort of a contrived evidence. Also, it doesn't actually prove evolution or even natural selection. It proves basically that populations can increase or decrease. And the latest one about the bacteria evolving, antibiotics, they're saying, we've got proof if bacteria is evolving to be immune to antibiotics. Again, that's just a population increase or decrease. The immunity is within the populations of bacteria. So when you use a certain antibiotics on them, the ones that aren't immune die, and the ones that are, their numbers grow. Has it evolved recently? Because still might be confused, going, well, does that mean? Well, they found really old bacteria from the 18th century in I think it was Antarctica in a wreck, and anyway they dug up this really old bacteria, and it had populations of both those who were immune to antibiotics and those that weren't in the same batch. So it's not like it's new bacteria recently developed. These guys had never seen antibiotics. Okay, so that's that's just a big myth that's been spread. So we've got some problems here. Okay, so why was it ever accepted by scientists? If every time evolution, all the evolution's claims were falsified, so why has it continued? Why is it persistent? Because what happens is the evolutionists don't want to give up on their argument, on their belief. Remember, their religion, according to the Supreme Court. So they are constantly trying to invent new beliefs, ways to believe why they believe. I'm just so glad creation scientists have not given up the fight. Like, everyone's going, oh, you just accept it, you're idiots, you just accept it. If they had accepted it, those things that were put forward as facts would still be apparent facts. If they hadn't destroyed those false things, they would still be accepted, because the evolutionists are supposed to be checking this stuff and verifying and seeing if it's true. They're not, because they don't want to go against their belief. So creationists are having to do this, and it's a little bit of a war of nutrition, a little bit. You've got the evolutionists who've got all the money, they've got heaps more of them, they get heaps of funding, they've got big, massive labs and all this stuff going for them, and they're just pouring money into it, trying to look for evidence. And so there's more of them looking for this, and there's the creationists who are trying then to come along and disprove. It's just taking, and it takes time for the. If there were 99% creationists and only 1% evolutionists, they would probably be able to refute these things, these silly ideas, much faster. But as it stands, every time they do bring up one, whether it's a year, 2 years, 10 years, sometimes it takes longer, they will eventually all fall under scrutiny and observation. So as more scientists are becoming creationists, which is starting to happen now, because the theories are starting, like some of the very, very long-standing theories of, or supposedly facts of evolution, as they've come under more and more attack and more have fallen, as I did once a video on icons of evolution, is each icon of evolution that's been upheld for some of them 80 years plus, as they fall, more and more scientists are starting to question it, because they've held on to these long held beliefs in it. So what are some of these things? Well, whale evolution was supposed to be, considered. We can see it. There's the whales have pelvic bones and all this sort of stuff, which are, obviously signs of evolution. But as scientists have discovered, the whale pelvic bones are necessary for actually the breeding and giving birth to the whales. So they're not useless or anything. They're actually part of their actual normal bodies and needed. There's the ape skulls. There's a really good book I read ages ago, talking about 2 decades ago really, called anyway, it was on ape skulls. It was a really good one, by a guy who accepted millions of years that was his only fault. But it was basically went through the 40 skulls at the time that had been found and put forward as evidences. There's the famous Piltdown Man, obviously, which was a big forgery fake, orangutan jaw on a human skull. There was Java Man. There was H1 Nebraska Man, which was extinct pig's tooth. Each one was put forward. There was 40 of them that were put forward, and each one was shot down, all 40. And so that should have been, enough to make people start to really question these so-called transitional ape skulls or something. Anyway, they didn't. They still keep finding more skulls and trying to, come up with, oh yes, we found it. But again, it's about study. They keep finding, they keep getting shot down, but it takes so long for it to actually get into textbooks, change in universities' textbooks. When I talk to scientists, when I talk to people who have got qualifications and teach this stuff, they still are actually holding on to teaching and stuff that's been disproven ages ago. Okay, so evolution is it's lies basically, and false things, concepts that have been disproven are still actually being taught, which is really actually the problem with evolution itself. It's like a bad smell that won't go away. Yeah, why it should be taught at all is very questionable, I think. So what about transitional forms? There's the Archaeopteryx bird. Yes, that was put forward. No, it is just a bird with claws and teeth. Yeah, an extinct one. There's so many problems with the missing fossils, transitional forms. There's living fossils today, like the earliest fossils in the Cambrian layer, like the most ancient apparent supposed oldest layer called the Cambrian layer, with the oldest supposed life form, complex life form called trilobites. Well, they had no earlier ancestors. So if you go 5,000 feet under the Cambrian layer, they don't find any fossils or anything, ancestors of this. It just suddenly appears in the Cambrian layer, and there's jellyfish and all that sort of stuff. So that's called the Cambrian explosion. It's big, big mystery. How did all that life just, no evidence of any gradual fossils or any evidence, and it's the big enigma for paleontology. It's not really an enigma for a Christian. It's just, the evidence doesn't support evolution. Yeah, so what about these trilobites? Well, go to Australia outback and you'll find these trilobites. They're still alive, unevolved. Um, they're just living, and there's actually lots and lots of cases of living fossils, unevolved, exactly the same, from ants, bees, you name it. So yeah, it's very questionable theory when you find a trilobite, which is actually not evolved, and there's no real reason to believe it's like millions, hundreds of millions of years old in the first place. Okay, what about yeah, well, let's look at the other things that fall in the vestigious organs argument. Apparently 84, I think it was 84 organs were put forward as these are evolution's throwbacks in our body, proof that we're evolved. The scientific reasoning behind that type of argument is actually questionable, because you're saying just because science hasn't found a use for something, then it must be evolution's proof. That's really silly argument. It's very arrogant. You don't know a reason for its use, so therefore it must be evolution, because you can't find it. You don't know why it's there. That's just ignorance. That's not scientific evidence or anything. So vestigial organs, the whole argument for vestigial anything, we're talking the embarrassing, Richard Dawkins and all them guys. It's embarrassing when they bring up vestigial arguments, because they're trying to argue from an ignorant position. So vestigial organs, all the organs that were put forward have found uses for them. Okay, in the human body, they just didn't have the scientific knowledge to understand what different parts of them were for. And I'm sure if, they'll continue to find out different uses for everything that's in our bodies and in these things that they call, every time they label it vestigial, it should be like a red flag to you. The last thing that was called vestigial was junk DNA, vestigial DNA. Okay, that's should be a big red light, because they don't know the meaning for it, so it must be junk. See, again, same argument. And just from not in 2005 to 2013, around there, they found use for this apparent vestigial DNA. So anyway, another, it's just one after another after another. There's the fossils. Fossils take millions of years to form. No, they've found evidence for fossils. Stalactites, they take thousands and hundreds of thousands of years to form. No, they've found stalactites and everything off clothing and off boots and mine shafts that have been made. What else we've got? Yeah, fossilization. We've got that's actually got a better name than fossilization. It's actually got another name. These ice rings. They said, oh yes, we've got these core ice samples that prove we can, 30,000 years and all this sort of stuff. Well, they found a boat there during one of the wars, where they know exactly when it was sunk. It was under the ice. They dug down through the ice layers, and apparently, all these ice layers would have made it thousands of years ago, and they realized, oh, the actual ice layers are actually formed seasonally, not years. So thank God they found that boat and proved that the ice ring layers and all that, the way they were using them to date, was completely off. Tree rings, that's been put forward. It's got a very long name as well. No. Again, just every time they come up with something, every time they try and do something, the so-called evidence that they use to support their arguments, it's always disproven, or there's found a really viable reason. The strata layers, rock layers laid down, no, again, the long ages of, you know, the fossils and the dinosaurs and all that, no, they've got dinosaurs with actually flesh, red blood cells, all sorts of stuff. They've got all that, which is absolutely impossible for 60 million year old supposed ages. So they've found all them, and not just one or two, they've found lots of this. Um, you don't hear too much about it because the lady started finding all these dinosaur um, um, creatures with the actual that hadn't been fully fossilized. She lost her job. PhD lady, and they had to get rid of her, silence her. So that is what's going on in the world. There's a massive suppression, and there's a massive backlash if you start finding anything that goes against the supposed theory of evolution. Okay, sad. Spontaneous generation. Now that's been put forward. That was put forward even before Darwin. It was put forward for ages. And remember, evolution is not a new concept in the world. For philosophers all the way back for thousands of years have been thinking of different things like that. So Darwin just popularized the idea. Spontaneous generation. They used to believe that if you put rubbish out, it would produce rats. Okay, that was disproven. Then there was meat. If you put meat out, it produces flies. That one was produced. Put down. Then Louis Pasteur put down the one about bacteria. Proved that was actually airborne virus, airborne bacteria. And each one was put forward. Each one was, proven. No, this can't. It doesn't work. So spontaneous generation has been shot down. But then you've gone to the level of the see, Darwin. Remember Darwin. Let's go back to the fundamental thing. Why was evolution still promoted? When was it ever accepted, and when was it ever true? Ever. Okay, when was it? In Darwin's day? If we put our evidence into Darwin's day and they analyze what Darwin put forward, his evidence is wrong. He believed if you cut off the arms of parents and for enough generations, they would stop producing babies with two arms. He had no understanding at all about genetics. His understanding was if an animal was straining its neck during its life, then its children could develop longer necks by what they did. Look, his scientific understanding was flawed. Okay, so if we analyze what he believed and what he put forward, it would not actually be an existent theory. So why hasn't it died a death? When was it ever accepted? It should have been shot down in Darwin's day. Everything Darwin believed about, had no understanding about genetics or anything. All the arms, yes, your parents, and they're always going to pass on DNA that you've got arms. Doesn't matter what you do in this life. You tattoo yourself, whatever, your babies aren't going to have tattoos, okay? So you can be stretchy, pierce yourself, do whatever to your body, and it is not going to do past your children unless something happens to your DNA. There's a mutation or a flaw that's passed on. That's the only thing. So if you go and somehow put yourself in a big radiation oven or something, yeah, you might mutate your DNA when you pass it on to your children. That might have an effect. But no, not stretching your neck, not doing flexibility exercises, not, very little of what Darwin thought was true. So again, was he a big genius? No. His idea is his understanding was not right at all. Why is it still why is it still accepted, or why was it still passed on as amazing theory? Because it is a ideology that evolutionists want to believe. Okay, and massive numbers of them don't want to give up on it, so they keep fighting and trying to put forward new evidence because their old evidence is always flawed. I'll say that again. They keep putting forth new evidence because their old evidence is always flawed and always fails. So that's the thing. If they gave up, the theory would be dead because all the evidence they put forward has been disproven. But they keep going forward because they have to if they want to keep believing their theory. And they want creationists to give up because they're sick of having all the stuff they put forward fail. So they want them to. We don't want creationists taught. We don't want creationism taught because they don't want this battle because they are losing every time. They keep losing. Okay, so let's have a look at this. They've got a real problem with the spontaneous generation of non-matter to matter, and they're saying, oh yes, well we can sort of come up with an idea, endorphous, endomorphous, symbiotic theory or something. Anyway, is it in anyway, it's a theory that bacteria, they've got bacteria which they call simple, and it's not simple. All bacteria cells are complex, okay? So don't let that fool you. You've still got to have a massive amount of complexity just to have a bacterial cell. It might be less complex than a normal plant or human, a plant or animal cell, but it's incredibly complex still, and mathematically, not statistically probable that it can actually by chance form the protein chains. So bacteria, this spontaneous generation, the argument is it biogenesis? Is it God created like kind after kind? You know, you're going to get evolutionists saying, oh, we can see evolution, we can see bacteria evolving. Bacteria are not changing from bacteria, they're always bacteria. So that what they're talking about is, they're saying when they use the word evolving, they're saying it's mutating or changing within its own species. It's changing, making little changes within itself. It's called variation, and there's nothing wrong with that. Everyone believes in variation, but what happens is, just because there's variation, that's not proof that evolution from a cell to a human can happen. That's not. That's the big evolution. So they've defined it in terms like macro versus micro evolution. Now I can't be bothered getting into that. I'm just going to say it's variation. Evolution is not occurring from a single cell to a biologist. There is nothing evidence for that, or observable or otherwise. You can see variations in incredibly genius coding in the DNA that provides for a variety of environmental adaptation. That's clever programming by a clever designer, proving a more complex coding in the actual DNA than they thought, not changing from bacteria to another species. It's always bacteria, but it has adaptation in it, and it's clever adaptation. I mean, point mutation or mutations can change things, but is it changing it from with species to species? No, it is changing it and varying within the species. Again, there's making small little changes, but none of them are actually ever accumulating to a species to species change. So genetics does not have that. Okay, it's not in their favor at all. So we're looking at biggest problem for them is how do you get a simple bacteria cell It's not that simple. So they came up with this symbiotic type theory that they'd have one cell, and then a symbiote cell would come and live in that, and then somehow they would become one cell and all this. And so they've tried to come up with this theory to try and work out how you could get a complex plant or animal cell by having symbiosis. So we do have symbiosis. We actually have a massive amount of bacteria living in us that help us and live within us. Again, that shows interaction, incredible design. Because you're going to have massive problems if you're promoting symbiosis. Because what about the idea of symbiosis can be amazing, strong evidence against evolution? Is they're using it, trying to say it's evidence for evolution, but in a way it works against them quite strongly, quite badly. What about bees and flowers? Which one evolved first? You know, the bees need the flowers to pollinate the flowers, but they need the bees. You've got a massive symbiosis. A symbiosis, when you start taking it into consideration on the planet, even in us with the bacteria we have, it actually adds further complexity to the problem. Because you've got now the actual creation itself of symbiosis and all these animals, plants, and bacteria all interacting and helping each other so they can survive. Okay, you're adding massive more complexity. It's not just a singular problem of genes and DNA anymore. There's a symbiotic problem. Okay, so I'm just saying the complexity on Earth is just astounding by itself, let alone putting the argument of symbiotic relationships into the mix. There's actually not enough time, and scientists know this, evolutionists know there's not enough time for the complexity that we find on the Earth and the variety between creatures and everything for all the mutational changes to have occurred. There's not enough time. They haven't got it. They proposed 4.5 billion years old, and that supposed age is incredibly controversial because it really doesn't hold up under scrutiny. But anyway, the 4.5 billion years is really a problem for them, and they thought it was eons of time. Massive problem, because the more complexity they find, the more they realize, oh, amino acids somehow managing to form just amino acid chain is statistically improbable itself, let alone all the complex and literally 30. There's protein chains of like 80 and protein chains of like 30,000. So you've got some real complexity problems just to make protein chains. Okay, you've got 300 amino acids. I think it's 300. It might be more, less. Anyway, and only 20 of them are used to make proteins. So first of all, you've got to get all the elements together, the 300 amino acids. You've got to have conditions. Only 20 of them, if any of the 300 that aren't the 20 that are used in proteins, get mixed up in them proteins where they're forming, it ruins the protein chain. So the complexity of how do we get the 300 not to be all the 300, or sorry, the 280, the ones we don't want, how do we get them to not come near us while we're forming our protein chains out of the 20? So they've got to overcome that. That's statistically going to be difficult, that problem. Now, I did some maths on it, but I didn't put in consideration the problem with the 300 and then just the 20. That is a huge hurdle. But say I simply just went straight to, we're going to have 20 amino acids to form the proteins, but that's not actually the truth. It's 300 and there's only 20, and they've got to not have the other ones in it. Okay, so that straight away is incredibly statistically improbable that they won't contaminate. Then you get the problem of there's different types again of amino acids. They can have the left-handed, right-handed type, and only left-handed are used in a protein. So if they get any right-handed amino acids in that chain, it won't fold when it folds into a protein. Really, really big problems there. Because that's again a 50-50, and for it just gets to, I think it's 10 to the power of 45 straight away just for that. The other one was 10 to the power of 75. So you go, what, 10 to the power of 75 to get a chain of about 150 amino acids all in line. Then you've got only right-handed, 10 to the power of 45, and then you've got the issues of peptide bonding, and all these other issues that come in. If you go the 300 to the 20, it just gets really complex. Okay, so overall, there's not enough seconds on the Earth for the mutations to have changed just for one amino acid change to turn into a protein. Statistically, just for one amino acid to turn into a protein. So to think, okay, so that somehow happened, but then you've got a cell has to have a cell wall. It's got to have, the DNA has to have formed inside it. There has to be, there's a lot of stuff that has to go on. There's a lot of regulators that have to have. How do you let things in? How do you let things out? How does it split? Where's the fusion? Where's the, how are all these things created? Where's the information coming from the DNA to go into these things? Huge problems. Okay, there. So that's brought them to maybe there's not enough time on the Earth. Okay. Yes. So they think, we haven't got enough time. We're running out of time. So Francis Crick and another guy, Leslie Orjo, in 1973, anyway, they wrote a paper saying if life has evolved on the Earth in the last 4.5 billion years, then it mathematically, or it's very likely that it has evolved somewhere else in the supposedly 15 billion year old universe. Okay, so if it happened here, it must have happened somewhere else. So they wrote that paper, and then along came the aliens. Okay, so there's a lot of theories now, and now a big one is that aliens sent life here. It's called directed panspermia. That life was put here, directed from aliens away, somehow put it on the planet. And there's the aliens one. But remember, the whole idea of aliens evolving somewhere else was, Francis Crick was, if it happened here, then statistically it should have happened somewhere else. If it happened here, it must have happened somewhere else in the universe because of the probabilities. But the problem is, if it didn't happen here, then it didn't happen anywhere else. So the alien idea was, if it would happen here, it could have happened somewhere else. Again, throwing the problem, and scientists are starting to do this. They're starting to say, well, we don't believe it happened here because, time. They've got problems with time. So they're saying, we think it happened, evolved somewhere else, and then life was put here. Why? Because they can't prove it. We can't prove it here, so what we'll do is we'll throw the problem outside of where we can scientifically observe or prove, and we can believe that, we've got our belief still intact, because scientifically we can't prove it or disprove it. So it's a cunning way of them having their little religion and having no one else be able to disprove it. Okay, that's what they want to hold on to. So so it's not just aliens. There's lots of things. They think, oh, maybe life evolved on Mars and then came here by meteors. Maybe there's life on the moons of Jupiter or Saturn. Europa or Titan have believed to have oceans on them, and they think maybe there could be bacteria living in the oceans. Okay, so they've sent the Curiosity rovers and all sorts of stuff up to Mars, and they're trying to find life on Mars, or proof of bacteria on Mars or something, because they strongly want to believe in evolution so bad they're willing to put billions behind their idea. Again, if you put billions behind, you had 99% of scientists on the planet who are creationists, guarantee you they'd make far more breakthroughs. Okay, it's just a wasted amount of money. Yeah, there's water on Mars, or lots of water found in the actual soil samples on Mars and all that sort of stuff, and everything. Yeah, but water isn't life, and they have found carbon. Oh, we found carbon. That's a good building block we needed. So they are really strongly. Remember, they believe this. But they've still got the problem of they've got huge problems. Anyway, so comets are supposed to have a liquid center, or liquid in them, in the interiors. They think maybe life or bacteria hitched a ride, survived all the radiation and spatial, all the harsh conditions, came to Earth, and that's how it got here. But their whole point, the whole ideology is they don't want to believe in a creator, so they're trying to put the problem off-world. So we'll believe in a comet bringing life to Earth, but we won't definitely believe in a God putting life to Earth. Okay, so you've got to look at the ideology behind it. It's not scientific at all. It is totally in the realms of this is our belief, and we're going to try and prove our religion. Okay, so it's a religion fight. Okay, so yeah, it's good stuff. Okay. Francis Crick, the evidence was, why we think life could evolve if it blew up here, evolve somewhere else, and the evidence from it was similar DNA. Oh, similar DNA found in the creatures on the planet, but that's actually more evidence if you look at it in light of the actual creator. Similar DNA, similar designer. Okay, so the evidence is there, but it's how you look at the evidence which has been a big problem. Let's look at the flood. Evidence for the flood. The flood evidence is crazily convincing, and it really shoots down and destroys evolution, like really chronically. And it's one of the things that evolutionists are trying to ignore now. They're trying to go, genetics is our saving grace, because of all their failed theories. Okay. Everything else is letting them down. So what they're doing is they're saying overwhelming evidence. Well, no, it's all been destroyed. You've only got what currently hasn't been destroyed that you're coming up with. Okay, so it's like putting rabbits out of the hat. They're having to keep coming out with new rabbits because the old ones are dead. Look, what evidence would you expect to find if there was a global flood? What evidence? The irony is scientists believe that Mars had a global flood, and then they don't find water or oceans on Mars. Okay, but they say, yeah, we've got evidence. We can see there was a global catastrophe on Mars, but on Earth, no. Scientists do not believe. I'm not talking all scientists. I'm talking evolutionists. Do not believe in a global flood. So, yeah. So how are they seeing oceans on Mars that don't exist and not seeing oceans on the Earth that do exist? How can they see that? So, because they're incredibly blinded. The problem is they can't believe in a global flood. They can't. If they did, and the evidence which is glaring them in the face, if they did, their whole evolutional theory would collapse on itself. So they cannot fundamentally believe in the Bible, what the Bible says about a global flood. They cannot. Because if the Bible is true, then they have massive, massive issues, big time. Because that means the entire sedimentary layers with their fossils that they say took billions of years, that gives them the time for evolution, is actually gone. Boom. It's been formed by a catastrophe, a global flood. So therefore, they cannot believe a global flood. That's funny. Okay, so the Bible says, yeah, there's a global flood, and why it happened. Okay, so what would it take? What evidence would it take if there was a global flood for people to be able to observe to know it happened? What would we look for if it really happened? Well, there should be billions of dead things buried in rock layers all over the planet. And you should be able to dig them up and look and find them. So let's have a look. Are there billions of dead things buried in rock layers all over the planet? Yes. Evidence, observation. Amazing. Okay, so that's what we'd expect to see, and that's exactly what you see. Okay, what else? Sedimentary layers been proven in the lab are formed by water to get them nice and sorted like that. Sorted by uh, weight of particles, all sorts of stuff. Create beautifully flat, beautiful sedimentary layers, which are only done by water. Okay, so yeah, that is a big problem because erosion in the rock layer strata is actually one of the big evidences. I'm going to actually do another one because this video is getting far too long. So I'm going to do another one just on evidence for a flood because I think everyone should really be aware of this because I think the flood is one of the most powerful evidences that utterly destroys the belief and ideology of evolution.